you now feel you have to win Iowa to stay in this race?
Well, things have gone much better than I anticipated. When I first started off, I thought if we got in second or third in Iowa, that we would be alive and moving ahead. That obviously has changed. The expectation level has moved up. I can't say we have to come in first. You could, in theory, you could have 4 candidates within 100 votes of each other, and all 4 of us would survive. But I think I have to do well. I think that is clear.
First or second?
I can't quantify.
What about New Hampshire?
New Hampshire, my hope is to come in second in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, clearly, Governor Caucus, every time he gets on Boston TV, he reaches 82% of the people of New Hampshire. But the polls are consistently showing me moving ahead in New Hampshire, picking up, but still a long way behind Governor Caucus, but running ahead of the other candidates. My guess is that's about what's going to happen.
How well do you think the Simon message is selling there?
Well, I think it's selling in New Hampshire. I think it's selling everywhere. We've just been receiving a great reception everywhere. I cannot give you the name of a single state where we feel we've received a cold shoulder.
But Governor Dukakis has a considerable lead in fundraising on all of the other Democratic candidates. Are you counting on Iowa to boost your fundraising into New Hampshire and beyond?
Well, I think it will boost my fundraising, though frankly my voting record is such that it doesn't help fundraising. And I recognize that. It's a great record for the people, but not for attracting campaign contributions. And so I recognize I'm not going to do as well maybe as some other candidates might. But money alone isn't going to do this. I was outspent running for the United States Senate, faced a Reagan landslide year, and still I won. I think I can win. If money alone would do it, John Connally would be President of the United States today.
Tell us a little bit about what people here in Southern Illinois have done as far as boosting that grassroots organization that you need in Iowa.
Well, what has happened is that people in Southern Illinois and from other sections of the state, but particularly from Southern Illinois, have been writing letters to people in Iowa. They've been volunteering. They've been going up there, some of them walking, some of them just visiting, and it has had an impact. I run almost every day I'm in Iowa, and I think probably literally every day in Iowa, I run into people who say, I got a letter written from someone who knows you in Illinois. Frequently they will add a handwritten letter. It impresses them. And when you see volunteers from Illinois, for example, Gene and Shirley Didvig from right here in Carbondale have been volunteers. And it impresses people that there are those who believe in your candidacy enough to come over and volunteer.
Last night you received quite a bit of a round of applause for your remark on the total test ban. I'm just curious, today of course you picked up the support of the Illinois Freeze movement. One thing that I'm curious about is when you are president, if you are president, you'll be followed around by an Air Force officer with what they call the football. Have you done some thinking about that responsibility?
Yes, obviously anyone who seriously contemplates the presidency, you have to be aware of the awesome nature of the responsibilities. That you literally have your finger on the button that could destroy civilization. And it is a responsibility you don't go into lightly if you have any kind of a comprehension at all of the magnitude of the responsibility. I've been close enough to the presidency to have at least some insight into that awesome responsibility, and I think I'm prepared for it.
Where do you see the economy now favoring either Democrats or Republicans, keeping in mind the trade deficit apparently is coming down, interest rates relatively low, unemployment relatively low compared to 8 years ago? Can the Democrats score on that issue with the Republicans and
well,
ADA?
I think there is an awareness that there are a lot of things wrong with this economy, that we're living on a massive credit card, and that we're going to have to get a hold of it. And while unemployment rates may be down compared to what they were early in this administration, compared to where they were 15 years ago and 20 years ago and 25 years ago, they're much higher. And there has also been some finagling with those statistics. This administration has added the armed forces into the calculation to get the numbers to look a little better. And so we really do have some major problems out there. The economy is going to be part of it, but it doesn't necessarily dictate. If I can use an illustration, we had a very popular president, Dwight Eisenhower. The economy was moving along reasonably well, but the American people chose John Kennedy for President of the United States because I think they sense he had a vision of where we have to go and what we have to do.
You've mentioned defense spending should be cut. Do you have any specific ideas?
Well, there are a whole series of things. For example, we're now authorizing 2 additional nuclear aircraft carrier flotilla. That's going to cost us about $36 billion. We already outnumber the Soviets 13-1 in aircraft carriers. Those are pretty good odds. I really don't know that we need 2 additional aircraft carriers. You eliminate those. Let's just say you use a few billion of that for education and a few billion for jobs and use the rest of it to reduce the deficit. I think we'd have a stronger country, not a weaker country.
Has the presidential campaign changed you personally or your perspective on campaigning in any way?
No, I'm Paul Simon and still Paul Simon. In fact, that's one of the things that the critics talk about, that, you know, I'm not doing the sort of things to finesse myself to become, to look like a presidential candidate. I'm not shifting my views to accommodate the latest public opinion polls and those sort of things. I think I just have to be myself. And if that's what the American people want, fine. If they want something else, that's the way a democracy works. But the people of Southern Illinois are going to find Paul Simon pretty much the same. Basically, the message is the same. It's a message that we have to pay attention to the needs of our people, that we cannot simply pander to the whims and wishes of the rich and the powerful. We have to have a government with some vision, a government that really builds a better tomorrow, that pays attention to education, long-term care, people who need jobs, and the arms race, and things like that. I think the American people are ready for it. That was my message when I got in. It'll be the message on November 8th, 1988.
Senator Simon, thank you very much.
Thank you. Send a message to the nation, let me tell you. Thank you. Hi, how are you doing, gentlemen? Thank you. Great.
Follow me.
Republican, he wears the bow tie. He doesn't screw around and he doesn't get high. Gonna take the deficit and bring it down. Gonna take this country and turn it around. Paul's got good ideas and a lot of soul. That's why he's the man to fill this role. Paul's committed to people, he's committed to peace, and military waste is something he'll cease. Barring a recession, he'll balance them books, help him yank the power from the Republican crooks. He's the man for the Oval Office, give him your support in the Iowa Caucus. He's the man for the Oval Office, give him your support in the Iowa Caucus.
A little more soul.
Yeah, we'll tell you now, Paul's where it's at. He's not neo-anything, he's a Democrat.
Yeah!
I like to hear that, guys. Take care.
I lost my other district and then shuffle in one of the rallies.
Nicaraguan rebel leaders announced today they have postponed their scheduled peace negotiations with the Sandinistas. Johnson tells us they're making a direct appeal now to the American people for financial aid.
Peace talks between the Sandinista government and counter-rebels are being put on hold. In Miami, Nicaraguan resistance leaders announced either they or Roman Catholic Church mediators could make the scheduled February 10th meeting.
The new date will be arranged with the Cardinal and the mediation group for the next few days, and that we remain committed to the process of achieving peace and democracy in Nicaragua.
The Contras may be waiting to see what happens on the ballot.
You notice my flowers are Dan Redder.
Yes. That's for not showing up for breakfast the other morning.
Valuable advice that
Okay, now I'm going to bring the food in to you. If you want to.
Great.
Yeah,
You guys want to move back a little bit? So
what I'm going to do is I'll bring food into you and we'll put it on the table. You can move the chairs around, not just shoot you're getting ready to eat.
Okay.
Yeah, food.
Good.
glorious
Food.
That's sausage and mustard. Cold chili and mustard.
Food plates here.
Oh, beautiful.
Martin, do you want to food shopping?
Yeah,
They're in
the
the,
same.
yeah.
Can we ask you a favor if you could get some Pepsi to
And also some white wine. Great.
She went out to get white wine and Pepsi.
Now, why don't we move the table out so we can...
that an invasion of Nicaragua was planned.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Have a seat and eat.
Oh, Terry, come on.
Just a moment. Just a moment. This will just be 30 seconds.
Keep the food hot anyway.
All right, we should be able to get another chair for you.
Okay. I'll sit down here.
All right.
She'll go ahead and sit on the chair.
Okay. Right. Well, and as it's Carrie Kay, aren't you joining us?
The chair's on the other side of the crowd over here.
All right.
Just talk to each other. Talk to each other.
Oh, I'd sooner not.
Sooner talk to you, Terry.
Sheila got a new dress, I want everyone to know.
I have a gold suit on now. What kind of bow tie are you going to wear today? Yeah, what is your bow tie? Red one?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that yet.
I got a red book.
Okay.
Thank all.
Simon, 63. Caucus, 55. Babbitt, 37. Gephardt, nothing. Is the only profession where there's life after death. What Paul has proved tonight is very simple. He's proved
Before I read this brief statement that I just typed up, I want to I want to thank all of you. I want to thank my family. I want to thank everybody on this stage and everyone here. Let me read a few paragraphs I've just typed up on an old beat-up manual typewriter upstairs. The votes are not all in yet, but it is clear that I will make a strong showing. For someone who started out in the first Des Moines Register poll at 1%, who wasn't given a chance when I announced that's not bad. Why have I done so well? In part, it is because of all of your hard work. But the major reason is the basic message that we need a nation that cares once again, that defends the less fortunate, that gives hope to those who have none, that moves toward a more secure world. Coretta Scott King, the widow of Martin Luther King, recently wrote that what this nation needs is not a leader with fire in the belly to become president, but a leader of conviction and substance who has a fire in the heart. She is right. She is right, and my stand has been a long, clear, consistent stand in that direction. To the people of Iowa, I extend my thanks, not just for myself, but for all those who seek change. Tomorrow, it is on to New Hampshire. The road ahead will not be easy, but the goal of a better, more compassionate nation and a safer world is worth all of our efforts, and those efforts shall continue unabated. Thank you very, very, very much. You are marvelous, all of you.
noticed that these kind of strokes are a little bit yellow anyway. They're a little blue. Well, I've done stuff where I've set up speedotrons in the fork, the light the whole time, and use this as a backlight, and it's looked yellow. Yeah. Now, what kind of problem is film do you use?
As they walk into each other's.
Precincts are showing very heavy turnouts. Democratic candidate Bruce Babbitt says the more the merrier. The former governor says a strong turnout will help his cause. He says the prospect
So they said in network news to sit on your jacket.
I guess that's what we're doing. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Check. Check.
Gentlemen, please don't lean forward and get a shot.
Okay.
You lean towards the middle also.
Are you doing an introduction, Jack?
No, we'll do that later on. Don't worry about that.
The one music video.
What? You're not getting? I don't know, folks.
All the batteries. No,
What's the deal?
Let's try this. He said put it on your coat.
All right.
Just put it
over here.
Yeah, let's do that.
You put it in your coat pocket.
Do you want to plan on wrapping it up at the 15 minutes? Terry's going to give me a cue. How much time would you like?
We'd like 15.
Well, we're going to have 15
Okay.
minutes. But a cue so that she's going to jump on me when the 15 minutes is up.
That'll be fine. Just give me a cue from over there like that. I'll
Okay.
take care of it. Okay?
Okay, I'll wrap you up then.
Okay, thanks. Well, I hope this thing is working now.
What time did you start today?
Not that early today.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
You guys are used to it.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Again, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
4, 5, 6.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What time did you start today? You were in Iowa
We
this
actually
morning.
started, I left the apartment there about 9 o'clock this morning, so it was much later than usual because we had, after the debate, there were a series of receptions we had to stop by last night, as well as some TV interviews we had to do last night.
When did you finally get to bed?
Yeah. Oh, I guess about 1 o'clock, 1:15, something like that. Wasn't that bad, but
an average night.
But no, I'm usually 11 o'clock or so. I get in. Some days it gets worse, and some days a lot worse than that. But
We're recording.
Okay.
Before you start, his mic is open. It's broadcasting downstairs.
You don't want that?
I don't think so.
They're saying they don't want Paul Simon's blanket.
Right, that just seems very odd.
Shall we begin?
I think we're ready. I don't know if they want to talk to us anymore.
Guess not. All ready?
Okay.
okay.
Well, let us begin with Iowa. You made that a
And the irony here is that they may help to unhorse his own vice president.
I really think it's a striking irony, David.
Okay, let's talk about the Democrats, Robin.
Yes, and now to the Democrats. This is how Congressman Richard Gephardt, who placed first in Iowa, reacted at a rally in New Hampshire. He says he is clearly the underdog there, but intends to stick with the campaign theme that worked for him in Iowa.
Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday the Democrats of Iowa delivered an unmistakable message that this isn't just an election. It's a fight for America. And I've come here to New Hampshire to say to you that it's your fight too. This will be a long struggle. The forces of the other side are powerful and will not yield easily. But we have the people, and in this election, your votes will continue to be the most powerful voice in this land. Some people don't like the proposals that I've made. There's always resistance to ideas that change things. But I was willing to take the heat in Iowa. I'm ready to take the heat here in New Hampshire, and in every state and in every place on every issue that matters to the people who are counting on us to stand and speak for them. In the end, this is more than a fight over individual issues. It is truly a fight for America, its people, and its values. And to those who say we cannot succeed, we reply. That's what they said as we began our fight for tax reform. And that's what they said as we entered the struggle to end Contra aid and set out to stop Ronald Reagan's secret war in Central America. And we did that last winter. And that's what they will always say all the way through this campaign. until we win at the convention and win in November and take back the White House and give it back to the American people.
This afternoon, I talked with the second-place finisher, Senator Paul Simon, also in New Hampshire, and asked him how he wants the Iowa results to be perceived.
Well, about 2 weeks ago or so, people were saying Paul Simon doesn't have a chance. The reality is we did better than I think any of the pollsters showed. And I think it is an indication that the basic message that we have to have a government that cares, that defends the less fortunate, that tries to build a safer world, that message really is catching on.
Is it the message that is the important thing, or is it the man who is the important thing at the moment?
Well, I think the message is the fundamental thing. Now, I would add the man is important also to the extent that there is consistency. I think people want to know that this is not just an election year conversion or a 30-second commercial that you've suddenly developed, but that there really is a pattern of consistency. They ought to feel comfortable that what you say you mean. And I think my record is very clear on that.
Are you implying that some of your rivals have not been consistent?
Well, all of us have been somewhat inconsistent. There is no monopoly on consistency. But there is no question that Dick Gephardt has made some very substantial shifts in policy over the years.
I heard you say earlier today that now you have a real shot at the nomination, you feel, but you also said that your hope is to come in second in New Hampshire. If you are to have a real shot at the nomination, don't you have to win somewhere?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But I think what is likely to happen after New Hampshire is that 3 of us will emerge with approximately the same number of delegates. And then that shifts the battle to Minnesota, to South Dakota, to Maine, to Wyoming, the pre-Super Tuesday states.
And you would expect to win in one of those, you mean, or some of those?
I think that I would have to win in one of those or run very, very strong in one of those. That's correct.
Now, that's assuming that you beat Gephardt in New Hampshire next week. Is that right?
Well, I can't say beat because, we might come within, let's just say, in theory, 100 votes of each other. I think we both emerge strong, but I don't think that's likely to happen.
You have been leading him substantially in the polls in New Hampshire, coming second or right around second with Gary Hart in a recent poll. Suppose Mr. Gephardt's momentum from Iowa should cause him to beat you in New Hampshire. Would that be the end of it for you?
It would not be the end of it, but I hope that will not happen. There's no question it would hurt. But what you describe is accurate. We have been ahead in the polls, ahead of Dick Gephardt up to this point. But there is no question that all the publicity surrounding the Iowa primary does give him a boost. And I would anticipate that the next polls taken in New Hampshire will show him somewhat ahead of me. I don't think that's what's going to happen on next Tuesday.
Conversely, would Governor Caucus's third place in Iowa cause some weakening of his position in New Hampshire, do you expect?
Well, it did not strengthen him, but he ran strong enough so that I think he is still a very formidable opponent.
Do you think he's unassailable in New Hampshire now?
Well, I wouldn't say anyone's unassailable.
But you regard Dick Gephardt as the man to beat now in this coming week, is that correct?
I think the contest immediately is between Dick Gephardt and myself. Obviously, I'm not opposed to anyone changing their minds, voting for me instead of Mike Dukakis.
Well, Senator Simon, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Robin.
Third in the Democratic standings in Iowa was Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis. These were his comments last night.
We'll be in Manchester. The Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States. Thank you all very much. It's been terrific.
And now back to our analysts, Mark Shields, David Gergen, Cookie Roberts, and Roger Mudd. Roger Mudd, we heard Gephardt say a moment ago the message from Iowa was unmistakable. Was it unmistakable or was it mistakable?
But I don't know about mistakable. I'm not sure I know what the message was from Iowa, except that that there's really, I don't think, a clear winner, and no message carries forth. It seems to me that Gephardt did not score a walkaway yesterday. He goes in there with some amount of loosening of the money, and I think he's got some momentum going. Seems to me, I hate to disagree with Senator Simon, it seems to me that Paul Simon was the major loser of the three yesterday in Iowa. He really should have won out here. He was from Illinois and has worked over the state with some energy, but when you take a look at him in New Hampshire, I don't think he's going to make it, and without making it in New Hampshire, he has nothing to look forward to in the South after that. So it seems to me he's going to get squeezed next week in New Hampshire.
Koki, what was the message sent for the Democrats from Iowa?
It's a muddled message. There's no question about that. That you have this grouping at the top, and Dick Gephardt did arouse some passion at the end. We had been missing that up until then, and obviously he's upset his opponents. Senator Simon just talked about inconsistencies. We're hearing from Simon's people that we can expect a very nasty campaign is probably too strong a word, but what they would call a frank campaign, talking about Gephardt's flip-flops on the issues. And we're hearing from Gephardt's people that we're going to hear about Simon voting with President Reagan on a variety of issues. So that I think that we're in for a rough week in terms of how the campaign is going to go in New Hampshire. Michael Caucus is the person who seems remarkably calm coming out of Iowa and very sort of serene. And I think that he seems to have a game plan where Iowa worked just fine for him coming in the way he did.
His game plan, Robin, is to win. He's the only one, Caucus is the only one who is willing to say, I must win in New Hampshire or my campaign is over.
Coming back to him in a moment, Mark Shields, are the Democrats saying out of Iowa, we really aren't very excited about any of these guys yet, or are they saying we're beginning to be excited about, say, Gephardt?
Well, I think the Gephardt candidacy was an intriguing one, not because of the persona of Dick Gephardt, I mean, who is not the most exciting candidate, certainly, in the history of American politics. I think last night to celebrate, he probably went out and painted the town beige. I mean, he is not exactly a dramatic, riveting figure. But his message was, and his message did engage the voters of Iowa. And Koki was a little strong in saying inconsistencies. If I took down my notes properly, Paul Simon said substantial shifts in policy over the years. That's not really a Pier 6 brawl that we're talking about in New Hampshire. He's accused Dick Gephardt of substantial shifts in policy over the years. So someone's got to turn up the thermostat in a hurry. But I think Gephardt won, and that's going to help him in New Hampshire. If Caucus does lose there, he's gone.
Did Gephardt clearly win David Gergen, or a muddled message?
Well, I think that the race finished up in a somewhat muddled way, but I certainly think that Dick Gephardt was the one person who did have a message, and I think there's something that's, there's a parallel between the Gephardt campaign and the Robertson campaign, and both of them are tapping into some real anxieties out there in the country, and the case of Robertson about moral issues, in the case of Gephardt, something new that's out there, and that is a loss of our economic independence and loss of our economic security. And I think those issues are going to come front and center now in this campaign, as other candidates recognize just how much of a leap. After all, 2 months ago, Dick Gephardt was at 6%, and he had this bounce when he found his voice, when he found his message, and when his candidacy really revived. And I think that's the message he's going to carry in.
Let's look at the task ahead for him, David. He is still only, at least he was in the latest polls I've seen.
From New Hampshire, around 7%. What is his, what's he got to do now to keep this going? I think he has to beat Paul Simon in New Hampshire. I think that's right.
Likely that he can beat Caucus. But both Simon and Gephardt now have a money problem. Caucus has a juggernaut financially compared to the other two. Both Simon and Gephardt need to be able to go out and collect some money. One of those two is going to come out of New Hampshire in fairly decent shape, and if Gephardt can beat Simon, he'll be the guy. It would then be a Dukakis-Gephardt race going into the South. They'd have to contend with Al Gore at that point, of course, but they possibly could narrow the race down to two men if Gephardt could beat Simon. That's his real objective. Just as Simon has to beat Gephardt in order to remain viable. I think Roger Mudd was absolutely on target. that Simon's in a squeeze situation right now, and it's a tough one.
Roger, on Gephardt's prospects in New Hampshire?
Well, that's what David said is accurate. I think that he's won in Iowa, and for him to drop off the pace in New Hampshire means that his message fit Iowa and nowhere else. So he's got to finish second, at a minimum.
Yeah.
What he's talking about is changing the message a little bit. We heard from him for the first time today the word computers. He's been talking about, you know, if American cars sold in Korea, they'd cost $48,000 or whatever. Or the Hyundai sold here for what they sell there. Now he's also talking about computers, which are, of course, of great interest to the people who live in New Hampshire and work in high technology. So what he's trying to do already is sort of tone that message more to, we need to be able to compete in foreign markets much more than we need to be keeping them out of here. America should be shaping its own destiny. He's hoping this will appeal to the people who, you know, have as a road sign as you come into their state, live free or die.
Mark Shields, Gephardt in New Hampshire, what's he got to do?
Well, I think obviously he has to run ahead of Paul Simon. I think he's got a shot at winning New Hampshire, quite frankly. I mean, he was at 7% in a poll taken before Iowa, considerably before Iowa. On the day of the Iowa caucuses in 1984, one Gary Hartpence was at 9% in New Hampshire, and was roaring off into the low 40s the last time I saw, 8 days later in 1984. So he could catch. And let's remember one thing about the New Hampshire voters. They have shown no particular geographical affinity for regional candidates. I mean, remember President Edward Kennedy, who was beaten there by a Georgian named Jimmy Carter in 1980, and President Edmund Muskie, who was held under 50% by George McGovern.
Let's go around on that. David Gergen, is Caucus now vulnerable in New Hampshire because of his third place finish? I mean, he's been running 40%, 35% in the polls in New Hampshire.
I'm skeptical that he's vulnerable. He has 80% favorability ratings in New Hampshire among Democrats, and those ratings have been going up in the last 2 weeks. I think he's going to be very tough to beat there.
Anybody disagree with that? Roger,
I would say, Robin, that the fact that he finished a weak third in Iowa, he was bunched, but still it was not what he had hoped, would raise the question whether indeed he is a national candidate.
Paul Simon,
I don't think he would lose.
Yeah, Paul Simon made the point. Well, it won't help him in New Hampshire. But now,
I would just say that I think Caucus is vulnerable in New Hampshire.
You agree with that, Koki?
I think it's hard. The last poll that I've seen, which was the one that's come out over the weekend, ABC Washington Post poll, showed him at 47%, with Simon and Gephardt tied at 13%, but most significantly it showed that his backers said that they very strongly supported him. I think that what he's trying to do is keep New Hampshire. He's spending a fortune, and then show that he's not a regional candidate by picking up some odd spots in the South.
Yeah, he's got a strategy of finishing third or second in Iowa, finishing first in New Hampshire, then coming back and placing second or third in the South to stay alive, and then get into the industrial states where he thinks again he'll be strong. So he's in pretty decent shape tonight.
Okay, let's talk for a moment about the other Democratic candidates. How do you think Jesse Jackson did, and what does it mean as he moves on into the South? Mark Shields.
Well, Jesse Jackson